Thanks for having me. I know it's Friday afternoon, so I'm going to try and keep this motivational. I wanted to tell you today about how the fastest growing companies are growing much faster through strategic partnerships. My name is Michael Sharkey. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Autopilot. Autopilot is visual marketing software for automating customer journeys. We have a booth out there. We've got a bunch of t-shirts to give away. I think we're giving away a massage as well, so you should go and harass them out there and they'll show you a little bit more about Autopilot. But I did want to start off today with this can of soup that you're seeing on the screen. What's my presentation got to do with a can of soup? Let me explain. So in the last 4 years, the food and beverage industry in the US has grown by 2.3% as a whole. And Campbell's belong to this 0.1% category, which is made up of the top 25 largest food and beverage companies. And surprisingly to me, 2.2% of this growth is coming from 20,000 startups. So startups like people in this room building innovative food and beverage companies and competing against these big guys. And so Campbell's were faced with a problem. They were stuck in this 0.1% bucket of growth, and they had to do something about it. Their shareholders weren't happy, their board wasn't happy, they weren't growing incredibly quickly. So they decided they had two options. The first option was to design and try and out-innovate all of these startups by building new food products and food lines. Or replicate some of the success. Look at the top products and just copy them and use their production and distribution to try and leapfrog these startups. But they realized that being a big company, it's incredibly hard to try and compete with disruptive startups. So they did something quite remarkable in the industry. They said, instead of fight or try and compete or design new food products, why don't we partner with these people? Why don't we give them access to what Campbell's does best, which is distribution, production, and funding? So they created this $125 million food technology innovation fund, and nothing like it's ever been done before. And they said, we're going to invest in these companies that we really like, and we're going to help them distribute, and we're going to help them with production, and we're going to make sure these companies are successful. And in turn, by investing in them, we'll grow much faster. So it's too early to tell how this experiment worked, because it's something they only started to do recently. But let's talk about Campbell's Soup for a minute. So it's 147 years old. Last year they did $8 billion in sales, and they're selling in 120 countries. And that can of soup you saw on the first screen is incredibly well known. That can of soup is iconic in art and all sorts of things. Campbell's Soup are known for a can of soup. And that's where they started their business 147 years ago. They made canned goods, and canned soup was the most popular product. And so you can think of startups, there's actually some up on this board here, and many successful startups, and I'm sure companies that exist in this room, generally are good at one thing. There's one thing they do better than anyone else. And so if you think of online stores, you might think of Shopify, and if you think of how do I build a beautiful website, you think of Squarespace. So these brands and these products have become synonymous with doing one thing and doing it better than anyone else. So as growth marketers, you're faced with a challenge when you're starting out or when you're growing later on. You can either grow much faster through building new features, exposing yourself and your product to new markets, and trying to build a number of features outside of your core focus. Or you can do something that a lot of modern companies are doing. They remain focused on the one thing that they do best, they refine it, and they continue to work on it, and they're known for being the best at it. And then they look for other companies that are specialists and focused as well to partner with to grow much faster. So I wanted to give you two real-life examples of companies doing that. InVision is one that I really like. InVision a few years ago, no one had really heard of. They didn't really exist. But they solved a really fundamental problem that designers face. They were wonderful to use to prototype and collaborate on designs. Before that, I remember at Autopilot, we used to put files in a design folder, and you'd click through them, and you'd try and remember where you were, and you'd pretend in your mind how this thing would work before you built it. It was a really horrible experience. So InVision came along and solved that problem, but they knew no one would be really interested in InVision had it not really solved the problem that the designers were experiencing in applications that they were using every day. So everyone in this room is familiar with Photoshop. I don't have to explain what Photoshop does. InVision knew that by partnering with Photoshop, they could get access to this huge audience that Photoshop had. And all of the designers that used Photoshop had the problem InVision was solving. They needed to prototype and collaborate and get feedback. So InVision did the smartest thing ever. They built this live share button, and they worked with Photoshop, and they said, we're really good at prototyping and collaboration. We want to put this button in your product, and it's going to solve the collaboration problem for designers. And so Photoshop said, sure, this adds a ton of value to our product. It's something that we don't particularly do very well right now. And so they let them build this button. It's a native plugin in Photoshop, and it went absolutely viral. This is an article from the Next Web. Everyone was talking about how easy it was to share your designs from Photoshop into InVision and prototype and collaborate. So for InVision, it gave them exposure to Photoshop's audience, and 3 years later, they're now a huge brand. If you live in San Francisco, they're on billboards everywhere. And one of their fundamental strategies was growing through partnerships. And Sketch is an emerging technology in design that they've now partnered with, which is used for more UI and UX design. And the prototyping capability in InVision is perfect for Sketch, so now they're tapping into that audience and growing much faster as a result. And Patrick talked about how your cost to acquire customers is going up. Partnerships can start to even that out because you're getting exposure to new audiences without having to spend a ton of cash. Zendesk is an older example in terms of how they grew. They came out of this world of monolithic software where you had these jack-of-all-trades, master-of-none support solutions that only worked in call centers, and they weren't connected to anything. You couldn't integrate with them with anything. They were generally on-premise. Zendesk came along and said, what if we build this beautifully simple user interface for support? And on their own accord, they started to grow. They had a high NPS. People told other people about the product. You might remember they had a widget on most people's websites back in the day, and that helped them grow tremendously well. But they also said, as we were growing, what if we were able to partner with a number of solutions that need to provide customer support once you adopt? And a great example of that is Shopify. So as Shopify were being started at the time, they were growing fast as well. But everyone that was creating Shopify stores needed customer support. They needed to be able to provide great customer support. So out of that generated a mutually beneficial partnership. They were able to partner together and work together. And so every time Shopify grew, Zendesk would grow because you'd install this Shopify widget and be able to provide in-context support for your customers really easily. So a great relationship. It added a step function to Zendesk's growth. And if you think about these as sort of pot-shot investments, each investment that they made in a new partner would allow them to grow at a much faster rate. So what's happening here, in my mind at least, is we're living in a world where there's this seismic shift towards specialist solutions. We're not in a generalist solution era anymore. The old way of doing things was evaluating 10,000 features, this jack-of-all-trades monolithic solution. I'm sure many marketers in this room can relate to that. You typically are evaluating solutions that solve problems you don't even have yet. But the modern growth marketer instead is really fueling this adoption of specialist solutions. They're saying enough is enough. I don't want to exist in this monolithic world with a jack-of-all-trades, master-of-none sort of solution. I'm going to go and find the best of breed for everything that I do. And so in doing that, what's really happened is the best companies, the fastest growing companies today have an entirely different philosophy to the market. They specialize in one thing, do it better than anyone else, and they use open APIs and integrations to partner with other complementary companies to grow faster. And so no one in this room, I'm assuming, has 125 million like Campbell's to go and take pot-shot investments in other startups and try and grow faster. But what you probably have is one thing that you do better than anyone else. And so I'd ask you to think about this as you go away today. What's the one thing that you do better than anyone else? And what are some solutions that you could potentially complement, like InVision, complemented Photoshop and provided more value to their customers? And so at Autopilot, we adopted this strategy for our growth. It was our primary strategy in go-to-market at the time. So we were similar to Zendesk in that the world we were in was really ran by these monolithic solutions. They were trying to offer people solutions for almost everything. And what we found in the market at the time was most marketers were moving to best-of-breed solutions. So for landing pages, they were using great solutions like Unbounce or Instapage. For forms, they were using new form technology like Typeform or Wufoo. They had so much more pressure on them, so many more channels to operate. They were looking for specialist solutions to solve their biggest problems. And so we saw this as a big opportunity where our competitors saw it as a threat. This explosion of marketing tech. And if you remember, Yasha this morning was talking about how it went from 2,200 companies on that technology landscape diagram to about 3,300 in a year. And so when I look at this, I'm like, great, more partners. When the traditional sort of monolithic approach looks at it, they say, well, oh shit, we've got to compete with all of this new, innovative, hip technology. And so a big part of that story for us is we looked at a company like Instapage, and they were growing with thousands of signups every month. And we said, well, you know, with Instapage, we could offer a really complementary solution here. People are spending a lot of money on AdWords, and they're collecting leads, which they're paying a high cost to acquire. So they might have been paying $300 to acquire a lead to their landing page, or for their Squatty Potty commercial. And so they were acquiring these leads, and then they were doing nothing with them. They would export a spreadsheet later, and then they might batch and blast it whenever they felt like it with something like MailChimp. So we said, what if we could build a seamless integration that could connect to the form on the landing page, suck in the data, and then allow people to design what happens, the customer journey, after we first interact with them. So that was our entire growth strategy for the last 18 months. We were looking at solutions that we could partner with, complement them, and go to market with them and tell our story with them to grow much faster. And it meant we didn't have to spend a ton of cash on marketing. And the good news is it worked incredibly well for us. We went from 0 to over 2,000 customers in just 18 months. And not only did we get really fast growth or cumulative step function growth from these partnerships and telling really strong use case driven stories with these partners, but we also were able to leg up in functionality. Like you see SendGrid's logo stuck on the wall. I have no idea how they're going to get that off. But the SendGrid is a provider of transactional email and email infrastructure basically for startups through an API. So we said, you know, why bother building email infrastructure when SendGrid have the best email infrastructure in the world? So we were able to actually not only level up to the same playing field to other competitors in the market, but we were able to partner with great solutions and make them champions and heroes in our story, as opposed to trying to compete with them and have to go to market against them. They were our friends, not our enemies. And it's great to have a lot of friends in this market. So there's something else that worked tremendously well for us as well. And what I would stress here is when you start thinking about these integrations, our CMO said something really funny to me before. He said, you know, the typical approach is you just think after a presentation like this, I should integrate the shit out of everything. Like, I'm just going to do integrations for everything to grow faster. But the best way of thinking this through is you need to think of those complementary sort of 10x use cases. If you think about InVision, it's really a no-brainer now in your head. You're like, okay, prototyping, collaboration, Photoshop, it makes total sense. Zendesk, Shopify, I mean, these are two very similar companies, similar approaches in their go-to-market, and they complement each other perfectly. So we were always looking in the early days for solutions that we could work with as well, just like this. So here's 3 examples for you. So Segment, many of you will be familiar with. It's basically an event-based system, so you can transfer an event, like someone signed up to my application, and you can transfer the identity information along with that. And at the time, it was incredibly popular with developers. Any developer that was working with the marketing team was implementing this because it was so easy. When a marketer said, I want to try this technology from this explosion of marketing technology, they could, with one click, send their data through to it. But at the time, we were selling, and still do, to SMBs and growth marketers, and they didn't want to spend a bunch of time coding, and they didn't have money to pay a developer to go and do all of this stuff for them. So we said, what if we could create this visual experience with Segment and turn Segment into this visual experience with shapes? So you'd type in, I want to do my sign-up event through a trigger, and then you could send an event back, and you could just type in what the event was called, and we'd write the code and do all the hard work. And what we saw when we did this was so many marketers who couldn't really get access to event-based marketing in the past started to do event-based marketing. It was incredibly exciting. So we went to market with Segment, and we did this co-webinar where we told this story with a mutual customer, PandaDoc at the time. And so it was Autopilot, PandaDoc, and Segment, and how they were using event-based marketing to activate more users in their product. So we were talking about the value add the partnership brought to both companies, and it was a real impactful use case. The second is Slack. Slack is just such an obvious choice today for many companies in terms of just you know, an integration or outputting things. Back then, it wasn't that clear to us. We didn't see any other sales and marketing integrations, but we had this thing where when we'd get like a new sale in the company, someone would post a Giphy on a chat channel, and we'd all like, you know, rally around it and celebrate. So we thought, what if we could automate this, because we're Autopilot, and we built the send Slack message shape, and we started using it in weird and wonderful ways. And so we got talking to the lovely people at VentureBeat, and they said, this is really interesting. We want to write a story about how you guys use Slack. So VentureBeat did some wonderful coverage, and that exposed us to Slack's audience. And in turn, we got on and did a co-webinar with the wonderful people at Slack and told this story about how you could you know, create these better communication experiences in your marketing team by using Slack and Autopilot together. Another inflection in our growth. Zapier is a pretty obvious choice. If you haven't heard about it, it allows you to zap information between two different applications, and they've got integrations for almost anything. So if you integrate into this, you essentially get 500 plus other integrations. So we didn't have the time to go and integrate with 500 things, so partnering with Zapier was a no-brainer to us. We did at the time a co-webinar with a customer of ours, Simple Green Smoothies, who are a true sort of online SMB, and we told the story about how they were doing cart abandonment with Shopify, Zapier, and Autopilot. And Zapier does some cool stuff when you partner with them. They send an email out to about 700,000, I think it's like 1 million users today. So you get this immediate exposure to their audience, and they start educating you know, their audience about you. And it has an unfound impact initially, but it has a cumulative impact over time because people are searching Zapier to see what applications are working together. And it brings tremendous value add to our own application because we can now connect to so many more applications. So summing it all up, how to get big fast with partnerships. So the key to this is start small. I don't want anyone to leave here today and be like, I need to just do some epic partnership, because it's simply not true. What you can do is do some really good co-marketing with another company that you might have a good relationship with, or there's a complementary use case. So we're actually working on something very similar to this right now, where we're doing a co-blog with another company we're really interested in working with and integrating with. And it's really a litmus test to see if our audience is interested in, you know, in this combination of products working seamlessly together. And so you can start small, test the waters. Maybe you do a co-webinar with a mutual customer with these people and just see how many people turn up. If 700 people turn up and you think you can convert like 10% of them, you have 70 new customers. Learn how to say no. When we launched, we had a number of different shapes, and companies would love these shapes. They saw their brand on them, and they saw that we were able to automate some really cool things. And so we got approached by a number of people wanting to build these shapes. And one of them was a brand we absolutely admired, and were like, oh my God, if we get to co-market with these people, it's going to change the world. But when we actually like wireframed and spec'd up and prototyped the design in InVision, we were like, this makes absolutely no sense. This is the worst use case in the world. None of our customers will use this. This is stupid. And so it was an incredibly hard decision to turn around to this company and be like, no, we don't want to work with you. But for us, it allowed us to focus on solving real problems. And ultimately, you can market the shit out of anything. You can, like the previous talk said, you know, you can make a video for a product that's broken, but ultimately, if the use case doesn't mean anything to the customer, there's no point partnering, there's no point marketing together. It'll ultimately fail, and it won't have a cumulative impact on your growth. Solve a real problem. So that's really that point. Just make sure you're solving a real problem. If it doesn't make sense to you, it won't make sense to your customers. And also stick to your core. I would encourage you today to stay focused on that one thing that you do best. Refine it over time. and look to grow early on through strategic partnerships. Don't forget partnerships. So many people look at these growth hacks and an enormous amount of ad spend when you can actually go and instead of seeing the world as a competitor, see them as your friends. Go out and find complementary solutions that you want access to their customer base. You can offer them something complementary and approach them and start a great relationship. So that is it. My contact details are up on the screen. Happy to answer any questions, and thank you for having me. Holy shit. Come on, guys. I was hoping to get a beer. There's too many questions. So the first one, I mean, the results we've seen is every time we do one of these announcements, we see an initial inflection in terms of trial signups, and then we know our conversion funnel pretty well, so we can see sort of from trials to conversions to customer value. It's by no means why we actually do them. Some of the integrations we do are just super meaningful to our customers, and we want to do them to add more value to their lives and keep them much happier. Our partnership acquisition strategy, probably going to take a little bit too long, but I can answer that later because they're letting us do that. Oh wait, I can read down here, that's easier. So how to convince a large company to partner with a no-name startup? That's a really good question. I think that one of the things we've found that works really well, for example, Slack were really huge when we wanted to do some co-marketing with them, and we were like little loser guys that no one wanted to talk to. So it did help that we had a little personal relationship and connection into them. But by just demonstrating the impact that our integration had, there's so many open APIs today that I talked about earlier. Like you can go and actually, if you're passionate enough and you think the partnership will work really well, just go and integrate. You don't really have to talk to them, which is the benefit of these open API and focused companies. So my approach with companies I really love is just to go and build it and then harass them for a meeting or record a video and send it to them and say, look at what we built and look at how many of our customers are already using this. Let's market this together. So that's the approach I would take, is just basically harass them until they can't say no anymore. The relationships with big companies, I think they're not going to want to talk to you unless there's some sort of value add for them. I mean, when InVision went and talked to Photoshop, and I'm making huge assumptions here, but they really had, they were solving a problem at the time that Photoshop was really struggling with, which is this collaboration and sharing designs. Like Photoshop were just so terrible at that. And they hadn't even really turned into their sort of SaaS subscription model yet. So they were looking to really add more value to their customers, and they love their little plugins. So I think if you build something of value and it's a no-brainer and it's an insanely good use case, these companies will actually want to talk to you. So this is an interesting one. Have you seen any issues being tied to another company's API when they upgrade the solution? The great thing is most modern APIs, not to get too technical, will have versions, so like V1, V2, V3. And most great API developers will actually maintain older versions, so it gives us the time and other companies time to catch up. But ultimately, the longer term solution in your companies, at some point you're going to grow to a point where you're actually adding value to the other partner, and so at that point, you can actually get them to self-serve and build the integration or take over the integration at some point, which is really helpful. But yes, we do. I mean, we work with so many different API connectors, and we've had to build some insanely smart logic on top to control even things like transit time between APIs, rate limiting, things like that. Our system knows rate limiting and those other parameters pretty well. There's no referral commissions or equity as part of the deal. It's just, it's really just two companies who like each other that want to co-market together. They get access to our database, we get access to theirs. Not that we share the database, but we just market to each other's databases with co-webinars or blogging. So no, I don't really think relationships of much value if you're sharing like 10% commissions with each other. I think it gets a bit shady. You're better to just add value to their product or they add value to yours. Yeah, so do you recommend partnering with other startups that aren't well known or only ones that are already growing? So we actually took a big bet on a company called Lob. when we launched, Lob, really cool, they're an API for physical things. So you can send postcards in the mail or letters by writing this API. And we said, wouldn't it be cool in a customer journey if someone's been a customer for a year, sending them a beautiful postcard in the mail anywhere in the world within 10 days? And so Lob were really only just out of the gate at the time. And we sort of went to them and said, can you do this? And they said, yes, we can. And so we made a pretty big bet that they could. And now we send tens of thousands of postcards a week through them. And they've been able to grow and scale with us. And we were able to sort of work with them and tell the story together. So yeah, I take bets on things. I take bets on new technology all the time. I think that's what it's about being in growth marketing. I mean, you're all taking bets, I'm sure, on new applications every day. I've still got 5 minutes. Holy shit, I'm never getting that beer. I'm just skipping the questions I don't like, so sorry. Yeah, I like this one. What does the do one thing well app trend mean for our growth marketing tool stack? I think it's honestly the most exciting time ever, and people just think it's creepy. But if you think about your iPhone and all the apps you have on it, you probably have a few specialist applications that are really good at doing one function. And because they're built on an integrated platform, they talk together quite well. And so I think what's actually happening with the internet is it's becoming one giant platform. And it's going to give us more and more choice over time. The only challenge we're going to come up against is what Yasha was talking about this morning, which is our customer database is spread across so many different applications. So it's one of the problems we're working really hard on solving, which is I want to use all these great tools in my stack, but I need to understand the customer identity. So we're trying to suck all that information in and provide you with a single view of the customer. And I think that's something, if you really want to have a best-of-breed approach and use many tools, you really have to think carefully through the customer marketing database and like where you're going to store the information, how it's getting updated. And it can become quite complex over time. But the beauty of it is you can pick and choose technologies over time because we're all in such a changing market where it's rapidly evolving and changing all the time. Every year there seems like another tool in our stack that we need. All right, cool. I think I'm done. I got through most of them. Thanks so much for having me, guys.